casual, get up, get a drink, you know, just enjoy yourself this afternoon because we're in for a special treat. This is Dr. Joann Wright. She is the Director of Clinical Training and Anxiety Services at Linden Oaks at Behavioral Health Hospital. She specializes in several treatment areas: dialectic behavior therapy, acceptance and automaton therapy, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. She is so excited to be here, and we're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much.
Please, let's welcome Dr. M. Joann Wright.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It really is such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for extending the invitation. I'm doing something a little bit different than I usually do in my presentations today, so I hope you like it. If you don't, you know, you get that evaluation sheet. But what I do in my various roles at Linden Oaks is I run the anxiety program, but I'm also the clinical director for the doctoral students, so I train the doctoral students. So I thought, well, maybe I'll combine a little bit this time and use some of the language, because what I've noticed when I train the doctoral students is when I use the theoretical underpinnings of what they're learning, they get it better. So I'm going to be talking some shop in here to give you a better idea of the theoretical underpinnings of what, you know, I'm thinking is going to be wonderful help for you when working with your children. Now, how many of you are parents and here in a parental role? And how many here are here in a different role other than parental? Okay, and some of those roles are?
I'm a middle school counselor.
Okay.
School social worker.
Okay, great.
Pastor.
Pastor, okay, wonderful.
High school counselor.
Fantastic. Let me start. Hi, my name is Joann.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Henry.
Stephanie,
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. It's really good to see you. How are you feeling today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good, good, I'm fine, thank you. Thank you so much. How do we know how to do that exchange? What's that? It's practiced. Somebody said it's learned. It's learned behavior. And so what we're going to talk about today is how some behaviors are increased and some behaviors are decreased, and how we go about doing that. Now, probably most of you have learned somewhere along the line in your life about operant conditioning. Yes, no, maybe? Yes, some. Okay. So some of you have not heard about operant conditioning. So let's kind of get down to this, because I'm going to start with some tips for parents. I'm going to talk about what operant conditioning is and what it looks like, so you can better understand some of these tips for parents. Now, I know in the title it says anti-anxiety, and indeed I run an anxiety program. But as a behaviorist, we believe that behavior is behavior is behavior is behavior. And so separating out anxiety from the other types of behavior, to me, isn't necessary. However, many of you probably came because anxiety was in the title, so please be sure to raise your hand, ask lots of questions if I'm not getting to some of the issues that you wanted to discuss today. I'm leaving a fairly large chunk of time at the end for discussion for that reason, because what I'm hoping I'll elicit from you are behaviors that you have seen that you would particularly like to get rid of, and see if I can have some tips for you on how to extinguish those behaviors. So, right, how do we get here? How do we get here? I mean, yes, newborns cry, but how do you go from crying to tantruming? Well, it's learned, and we're going to talk about exactly how that happens. So why kids behave in what I'm calling unwelcomed ways. I hate to use good and bad, but there are ways that we might call problematic or unwanted, and there's other behaviors that we like and we want to see more of. But all behavior is so I'm speaking from the behavior therapy world. Now, behavior therapy is the underlining therapy for a lot of therapies that you might come into contact with, like dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, good old-fashioned cognitive behavior therapy, and then what we used to just call regular behavior therapy. And if you have a child or are working with a child on the autism spectrum, you probably are working with an ABA who uses strict behavior contingencies, like we'll be talking about today. So all behavior shaped. That nice pleasant exchange that we just had, that was shaped behavior, because more times than not I find something pleasant coming back to me when I stick my hand out to say, hi, my name is Joann. Usually the person extends their hand and then they give me their name, and then we have a little pleasant exchange. So that's going to be desirable, wanted behavior. I get rewarded for it because I have this pleasant exchange, so I'm more likely to do it again. Now, what if every time I went around and said, hi, my name is Joann, and somebody slapped my hand and slapped my face and walked away? How often am I going to say, hi, my name is Joann? Now, I will tell you right now, we're not talking about slapping children. I promise you. That is not going to come up in this. But I was just giving that, if you get punished for a certain behavior, you do it less. If you get reinforced for the behavior, we do it more. So all of this is based on B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, and that's a specific form of behaviorism. A lot of folks have heard of also classical conditioning, because if you've ever heard of Pavlov's dog and the bell and the salivation, that's another type of conditioning. But they're both behavioristic. We just go with operant because we use that more readily. It's easier to use than classical conditioning. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at these 3 rules for parents, and bearing in mind behavior changes that we're trying to achieve. Reward desired behavior often and quickly. Don't accidentally reward problematic behavior, and we will talk about how easy that is. Can I tell you, I did it with my 2 dogs. I did it like 4 times this morning. I go, aren't I just going to go tell people how not to do this? My dog was barking, looking out the window, barking, and I went over, I'm like, Chewy, Chewy, stop it, stop it. I'm giving him a reward. I'm patting him. He likes me to be close. So is he going to stop? No. Hey, this is kind of nice. When I bark, Mommy comes over and pats me. This isn't bad at all. So it's really easy to accidentally reward problematic behavior and correct unwanted behavior, but do it deliberately. I'm going to return to the 3 of these toward the end of what we're talking about and expand on these a bit more. So problematic behaviors are shaped, but we also say that all behaviors are shaped in the operant conditioning world. Anxiety, isolation, yelling, refusing to cooperate, name-calling, defiance, self-injury, everything you can think of. If it's a behavior in our world, it's shaped. So that's a psychology joke, so some of you might not be getting it. But there's this really fun YouTube video. Does anybody like Big Bang Theory? Okay, it's a Big Bang Theory YouTube video of kind of a humorous look at operant conditioning and how it works. Now, again, not suggesting you do this at home, but it's kind of a fun look. I just learned how to use this, so.
Okay, so Kim, the night manager, went on maternity leave, and her husband's name is Sandy, right? So get this, her replacement is a woman named Sandy, whose husband's name is Kim.
What are the odds? Easily calculable. We begin by identifying unisex names. We then eliminate those unqualified for restaurant work and the aged, the imprisoned, and the limbless, for example. Next we look at the successive with...
It's an amazing coincidence. Can we leave it at that?
I'm sorry. Oh, Penny. It's as if the Cheesecake Factory is run by witches.
Sheldon, it's as if you don't think I'll punch you.
Come on, you guys, let it go.
Fine, whatever. Are you finished?
Well, thank you. How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. What was that?
We said be nice to Penny. I believe offering chocolate to someone falls within the definition of nice.
It does, but in my experience, you don't.
There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
And how about you, obnoxious and insufferable?
Oh, sorry, Sheldon, I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
You can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat.
Actually, it turns out I can.
Well, you shouldn't.
There's just no pleasing you, is there, Leonard? You weren't happy with my previous approach to dealing with her, so I decided to employ operant conditioning techniques, building on the works of Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Yet by this time next week, I believe I can have her jumping out of a pool, balancing a beach ball on her nose.
No, this has to stop now.
I'm not suggesting we really make her jump out of a pool. I thought the bazinga was implied. It's tweaking her personality. It's sanding off the rough edges, if you will.
No, you're not sanding Penny.
Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better?
Yes, you're forbidden.
Bad, Leonard.
This is a little bit more to go, but it's kind of my favorite part.
What could you possibly be talking about for so long?
Obviously, waitressing at the Cheesecake Factory is a complex socioeconomic activity that requires a great deal of analysis and planning. Bazinga. You know, using positive reinforcement techniques, I could train that behavior out of her in a week.
No.
Would you let me use negative reinforcement? I can get done before we go to bed.
You're not squirting her in the face with water.
No, of course not. We're talking very mild electric shocks. No tissue damage whatsoever.
Forget it.
Oh, come on. You can't tell me that you're not intrigued about the possibility of building a better girlfriend.
Penny's qualities, both good and bad, are what make her who she is.
You mean like that high-pitched, irritating laugh?
Yes.
You wouldn't prefer a throaty chuckle?
You're not changing how Penny laughs.
No, that would be incongruous. I was going to lower the whole voice to a more pleasing range.
Sorry, guys. That girl is freaky.
Come again?
Freaky.
Freaky?
Yeah, freaky.
Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
I'm going to make some warm milk and then turn in. I trust if you two are planning on engaging in amorous activities, you'll keep the decibel level to a minimum.
Of course.
Thank you.
Unbelievable. I was just thinking we should probably turn into.
Well, my new bed got delivered. When we're put it together, you can stay at my place.
Maybe that's a lot of work and it's kind of late.
Yeah, but
So that's basically what we're talking about. Not in such crude fashion, perhaps, but rewarding the behaviors we want and doing what we can do to eliminate the behaviors that we'd rather not see repeated. So somebody said earlier learning, and that is exactly what we're doing. Learning refers to changes in behavior resulting from practice or experience. Hi, how are you? My name is Joann. What is your name? That is that practice or experience that somebody else mentioned. Observation can lead to learning, so you don't have to do it. I can watch somebody else either get punished or get reinforced and see how their behavior changes. So it's not necessarily my having to do that. But learning does require memory. So kids who are too young to have memory aren't capable of doing this. So you have to have that language and memory. So you have to have language to have memory. You have to have language to have learning as well. This is a perfect example from a very old newspaper. And that's what we do. That's how when I talked about accidentally reinforcing behavior, right? Kid wakes up in the middle of the night. She's crying. What, of course, are the parents going to want to do? They're going to want to bring her and put her in the bed, and she was just reinforced for the crying. So, am I you know, when these types of behavior interventions started, it was on the cover of Time magazine. We're talking many, many years ago. And it said the cruelest cure across it. And even though when you hear about them and you hear about some of these techniques, it sounds that way, or it sounds like you're trying to train your child up like you would a dog. I mean, it sounds, to folks, it could come across that way. But when you see kids blossom and grow because they've been reinforced for behaviors that you want to see, they start feeling more confident, they start feeling better about themselves. And indeed, we use punishers very, very sparingly. We usually just save those for like dangerous behaviors that we want to make sure that they're not going to repeat again. But it really is fascinating to see kids thrive. Now, another application that we use in the anxiety program a lot is we use a lot of exposure therapy in anxiety. And that, too, is an operant conditioning, because we're teaching somebody who is afraid to do something to do that a little bit at a time until they're masterful at it. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to this fun term called shaping by successive approximations. Okay, so operant conditioning, again, we talked about it being learning, but it's learning of the consequences of your behavior. So what happened right after? So what was my behavior and what happened directly after? I mean, in the most simple terms, we call that just the stimulus response. That the stimulus in operant conditioning is it's the cue for behavior. So I'm thirsty. I see a cue that's going to do something about that. I walk over here and drink from it. I'm not thirsty anymore. So the water didn't do anything. It was the cue for me that it's going to be an answer to a problem for me. So I put some applications for each one of these slides as often as I can, I should say, not for every single one, of how this works. So a student in the classroom learns that if he participates in a group discussion, the teacher, his peers give him positive cues, head nodding, talking with him more often. Therefore, he's likely going to participate more tomorrow because he got these positive cues. Operant conditioning, again, making the consequences, so the consequences are going to increase or decrease behavior. So the consequences, if I looked at that and said, oh, that looks like a delicious bottle of water and I'm thirsty and I drink it, but it turned out to be something that had like a ton of salt in it, I'd be like, oh no, whatever that is, I don't want to drink that again next time I'm thirsty. So that's going to serve to decrease my behavior of walking over to a particular bottle that I think, ooh, that might have that salty stuff in it, and I didn't like that at all. But we can also, the cues in the environment change. We put coins into a machine unless we see an out of order sign, and that totally changes our behavior. So these cues are all around us at all times. We do something when kids behave in ways that we don't like called planned ignoring sometimes. And we do it in the anxiety program. For example, if we have a youngster who disrupts the group a lot and like jumps out of her seat and she's talking out of turn and interrupts other students, as opposed, like, well, the first few times we'll say, you know, hey, you know, we want all the people in group to get a chance. So if you can keep your seat and kindly not interrupt. And if we did that a few times and she didn't catch on, we would start employing something called planned ignoring, where when she does that, we give her zero attention. Absolutely none. Because now what we're realizing is the function of that behavior is attention seeking. So we might not have known that at first. We might have not known whether she just didn't know the social cues or whether she had perhaps a developmental delay or some other reason that she might be behaving that way. But once we put it together that this is attention-seeking behavior, what we don't want to do is give her extra attention for doing it, because then that's going to just keep increasing it. So the consequences go this way. Nothing happens, and the behavior is on what we call an extinction schedule. So that's exactly what that planned ignoring would do. So she's jumping up, she's interrupting everybody. We have her on an extinction schedule of not giving her any attention for that whatsoever. Pretty soon, oh, we're going to talk about something called an extinction burst in a minute, but eventually that behavior is going to reduce because she's not getting what she wants out of it. The behavior has no utility. It has no function for her. Or something really pleasant can happen, and then I'm more likely to do it again. So there are 4 terms in operant conditioning that sound super simple, but they can trip you up really easily. You're not going to have to use them as parents, so don't worry about it too much if you kind of get lost in the shuffle of all this stuff. A reinforcement is anything that increases behavior. So if you remember that Sheldon said he was giving her positive reinforcement, so which positive means you're adding something, and we'll get to that later. Negative reinforcements, you're taking something away. So reinforcement increases, punishment decreases a behavior. So when we talk about punishment, we're not talking about hurting the person or doing something terribly unpleasant to them, but we are employing some sort of a procedure that's going to reduce the likelihood of that behavior happening again. That's what we mean when we say punishment. So, you've got this girl in her classroom, and she's got a bottle of water. She's been allowed to, kids are allowed to carry water in their classroom. I don't know if it's true in yours, but she's been splashing students with her water bottle. Now we're going to take that away. And we're going to take her water bottle away, and that's going to be what we would call a negative punishment. Negative is taking something away. Punishment means we're reducing behavior. So again, don't worry about getting caught up in all that. I just want you guys to have kind of the guts underneath all of this stuff. So it's really easy to reinforce the exact behavior we're trying to extinguish. That happens. I mentioned me with my dogs this morning. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just did it myself. It's so easy to do. So your kiddo is at the dinner table and blurts out an obscenity. And you're like, that's it, go to your room. That's not allowed at the dinner table. And then after dinner, you go in, sit on the bed, and say, hey, I hope you understand. I don't want your little brother and sister picking up this language. And I'm sorry I had to send you away from the dinner table, but I was really worried that your brother and sister would start using that same word, and I don't want that to happen. And you're reinforcing because you're giving extra attention. So that's so easy to do because we do like to talk with our kids, and we do want to, but if we give extra attention to any sort of behavior that we're trying to extinguish, it's really easy to kick it up. Feel free to ask me questions as we go. I saw some people looking puzzled, so I thought it would be a good time to ask.
But why is that undesired behavior if you're explaining why you said? Is your point they already know?
Yeah. So, well, no, my point was that typically, a lot of times what happens with parents is that you feel bad afterward, and so you're kind of going in to soften it up a little bit. If you're simply explaining, what I would think would be better is to do that explanation right at that time, going, that is not acceptable language at the dinner table or in front of your younger siblings. You're going to your room, and then there's no more. So you get the explanation, but it's kind of sitting on the bed having the nice chat afterward that can be. Now, for some kids, it's not at all reinforcing, but so that's where it gets tricky, where you have to decide whether it's reinforcing for your child. For other kids, they don't want to hear from you. That's a punishment to have you come sit in their room. They're like, get out of my room. I don't want you in here. So you really have to, we're going to get to that in a little while of figuring out what's rewarding and what's punishing. Yeah.
Me?
Yep, Pink, sure.
So for Sunday school, we have 2 kids in particular that keep jumping and running around, and all the other kids will watch them. You can't ignore them.
Right, how old are the kids?
K-1, kindergarten, 1st grade.
Yeah, it's a little trickier with the younger ones, and you can't just ignore that behavior in certain settings, but what you can do is things like remove them from the group, or have somebody else watch them, say, no, you can't be in group and act this way, and remove them from the group.
That's what they wanted?
Well, that's the problem. So if what they were trying to do is get removed from the group, then it might, given a Sunday school situation, it might be time to talk with the parents to see if you think they're appropriate for staying in group. Yeah.
I was just going to say, what do you do when a child does do the expletive, let's say, and you want to send them up to the room, but then you've got your other kids who all of a sudden want to blurt in and say something, so then all of a sudden it becomes, you can't seem to get the one child out fast enough before the other two want to come in and attack or say something to them in regards to like their behavior. So do you know what I mean?
So I'm sorry. So the
one
two.
child that you want to take out of the room who
Right.
did swearing, and then she has an outburst, and the other two get mad at her for having the outburst and for saying those words, and so then instead of getting that child out, you then have the kids then are all fighting almost,
Mm-hmm.
and then saying things that are not appropriate. They're all doing it then. They're
Yeah.
all kind of engaged in that behavior.
Yeah. So, I mean, if what I'm here, so the other two kids didn't
So the other two
follow
kids
with the
don't want
expletives.
they're mad at the fact that the one child is swearing.
Right.
They're upset.
Right.
They don't want that child to do it. They want that child gone. In the meantime, they're saying things to that child that are not, they want that child to go too. So you're trying to get that child out, but those other two are saying stuff, and then in the meantime, they're all bickering back and forth. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It sounds pretty complicated, and the reason I say it sounds complicated is because we'd have to do an analysis of like what each kid, what their particular aim is. And so like if the two younger ones, if their aim was to get the kid out of the room, so if the kid says the expletive and you send them to their room, now for one, the two younger ones observe that behavior. Two older ones? Okay, I'm sorry, I thought they were younger.
The younger one is the one who's misbehaving. The older ones are mad.
Oh, okay, I missed that because in my example it was the other way around.
Explain that well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So it's older ones. So it's also so they got to observe the punisher of having the child removed from the room. And so, if they start behaving in similar ways, we could say, does everybody need to go to their room? Like,
Everybody off.
you might end up sending everybody off. But the reason I say it's complicated is because you kind of want to get underneath what's going on for everybody in there.
We are recording this, so some of you may want to hold your questions because you may not want to be on the recording, so I mentioned that.
Thank you. That's a good. So, yeah. Yes.
One last question. So how do you determine, or we're going to get to this, versus attention seeking or impulse control? So my 5-year-old interrupts just because that impulse control part of his brain is just.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Does this apply to both behavior and anxiety, or is it different for anxiety? I mean, because don't you sometimes kind of try to discuss it and explain?
So what I was saying before is behavior is behavior is behavior, and so even anxious behavior. So for example, sometimes for anxious kids, some of these things are come up in the opposite way, in that they're trying to get out of the classroom. So that's why we have to, we'll talk about this in just a few minutes. We're going to get to looking at all that, like how's this behavior functioning for this particular person. I think that's a really important distinction. So another thing that complicates this is you're getting conditioned as well. So you're either getting reinforced or punished. So here's a couple of examples. So a child in the classroom behaves like they're very, very helpless, and so the teacher gives the child extra attention for being helpless, and the child says, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'd do without you, you're my favorite teacher ever. And so it's going both directions. And that happens with parents too. So a child's school refusal. So we look at school refusal differently from truancy. Truancy is the kids don't want to go to school. They are probably sneaking around, like pretending like they're going and then not going. That's what we would think of as a truant child. But a school refuser is a kid who really wants to go, but their anxiety is getting in the way for whatever reason, for any number of reasons. They're not able to get out that door. They might be a straight A student, but they're too anxious to go. Being a kind-hearted, loving parent, you see your child really struggling and being very upset at the idea of getting out the door and going to school. They're a great student, they're a great kid. And as a loving parent, you say, oh, honey, stay home today. It's been too hard for you. And so then the child, says to their parent, I'm so glad you understand me so well, and I get to spend the day with you, and it'll be really nice. And that makes the parent feel good. So the reinforcement's going all the way around. So here's where we're getting into some of the questions that you were asking. You guys are ahead of me here. So it can be really difficult to predict and agree on, especially if you're talking about teachers and co-parenting and all kinds of scenarios that come into play that people have to agree on what acts will increase and what will decrease behavior. But there are, for some kids, that yelling at them can increase their behavior if being yelled at feels rewarding for some reason. Maybe this child really lacks attention in the household, and the only way they can get any attention is to do something disruptive or unwanted so the parent gives them some attention. For that child, that yelling is going to increase their behavior. Most kids it won't. Most kids don't like it when you yell at them, but it depends on the situation. Praise can decrease behavior. So if a child is exaggerating their symptoms, let's say symptoms of anxiety, to try to get some attention, and you give them that attention, they're likely to just keep that up. They're going to just keep upping that ante and going, oh, the more exaggerated I say that I'm feeling, I can't just come in and say, Dad, I feel really sad today. I have to come in and say, Dad, I don't think I'm going to make it through this day. I feel like I'm dying. Because Dad won't pay attention to me if I just say, I feel really sad today. But he will pay attention if I come up with a really big, exaggerated symptom. Does that make sense? Okay. So knowing the function of the behavior is key. So we use in behavior terms, is so funny because I just started with a new, my students come in August. So just in August, I started with new students. And when I had my first day of training with them, they said, well, we know one thing about you. We're told that the first thing you're going to ask us when we talk about a case is, it's what's the function? So they said, you're going to say, WTF. We're supposed to know that means what's the function, not the thing that we learned WTF means. So that's really where, some of these questions. So you were asking me about, some specific anxiety behavior. So is there a specific behavior that you were thinking about, or just anxiety in general?
I mean, like an example could be like anxiety about homework.
Okay.
Like my son, like anxiety about how long it will take.
Right.
So not wanting to even start because what if it takes too long?
Yeah.
Anxiety.
And so I'm getting ready to talk about something called, well, it's in here somewhere. I'm not sure how far back it is, so I'm going to mention it now. It's at shaping is what we want to do. And so if he's too anxious to start any homework, you can say to him, you know what, the goal tonight isn't going to be to finish. The goal is to get started. So how about we do a half hour of homework? Unless is he somebody who is just going to stay until it's completely finished, or is he somebody who won't start? Does anybody have kids who won't start their homework because it'll take too long? Both? Okay, both ends?
Gets kind of frustrated about starting it, so then kind of puts it off.
Yeah.
Then will implode, but won't actually won't go to bed until it's finished and cannot sleep.
Oh, gosh. That's a hard, yeah. So unfortunately, so that's like a behavior that's very similar to somebody, is your child perfectionistic? How did I guess? In 2 sentences, I guess your child's perfectionistic. Because, how about your child? Is your child perfectionistic? Yeah. Perfectionists have such a hard time getting started because they are so afraid to do it to their level that they want it done. So it's in that, it'll be shaping behavior of, I use a little saltier language, not that bad, but I'll say doing a lousy job. Learn to do a lousy job of your homework. Then you can go back, and if you have time, then you can make it better. But it's better to get in, a lousy, and instead of taking the 0 on it, how about you do the best you can do in the time you have. If you have leftover time, you go back and neaten it up. And so it'd be kind of shaping that behavior as opposed to, because we've had lots of kids in the anxiety program who have done exactly that. We've had kids that are absolutely brilliant, straight A students be on the verge of flunking out of school because they have to rewrite their paper 8 times. The 7th one, they're not even going to turn it in. So we'd have to talk with them about, what is underneath that not turning it in. So we do get to kind of what's underneath that, like feeling of turning it in when it's not what you think is your 110% best, and getting to be okay with that. So that would be the behavior that we would want to shape under those circumstances. So that's where you have to get at the function of the behavior. So it sounds like in both cases it's perfectionism getting in the way, and the idea of turning something in that's not up to their standards, and getting them comfortable enough with that. So that's where we do that's where the exposure therapy comes in with that, because we actually might, depending on the case, and we do really tailor this very specifically case to case to case, but you can start looking at some of your children's behavior today and some of the things that you're like, wow, I really can reward that if I want them to do that more. And I really am kind of letting them get off the hook with these behaviors that I don't like, and really start looking at some of these things. But we'll do things like, we might even call their teacher and say, hey, I'm going to have Tim turn in a really rotten paper because I want him to get that feeling of turning in not so great of a paper to you and getting okay with that, to see how that feels. So if you can not grade him on, he doesn't know you're not going to grade him on it, but so get him used to saying, well, this is the best I could do. Or, he's going to turn in a paper that he doesn't have to be really crummy, but he can turn in a paper that he didn't think was 100% his best and get okay with that. Like he's going to say, I'm going to get a D on this, I just know it, and get the feeling of turning that in. And getting used to that, because the more he does that, the more he's going to be willing to do that, and the more often he'll do that. So what we work on the most in the anxiety program is we don't want kids to stop dead in their tracks. We want kids to learn to move forward through worries, fears, anxieties, upsettedness, anything that might be standing in their way of moving forward. We want to help them move forward through that, as opposed to making accommodations to keep them from moving forward with that. I've got an example of that coming up. Okay, so here's where, remember, reinforcer increases behavior, punisher decreases behavior. Positive means adding something. You just have it there. It doesn't mean good, because in most terms we think of positive as being good, but it's not necessarily. Positive is adding something which is either a positive reinforcer or a positive punisher. That's why it's not always good. Because remember, he did a positive punisher to Leonard when he scored him in the face with the water bottle. Positive punisher. So he decreased his behavior by adding something. So positive means adding something. Negative means you're removing something. And removing something can also increase or decrease behavior. So if I'm standing here and all of a sudden I feel like a tingling of an electric shock under my feet, and I go, ooh, and I stand over here, but that's where they wanted me to stand, then they added something to get me to do the desired behavior. So something was added to get me to do, something was removed because the shock was removed to get me to do the desired behavior. I know that's such a weird kind of example, isn't it? So positive reinforcement is what we want to do the most. This is the most effective. It's the most pleasant for everybody involved. It's getting that chocolate because you lowered your voice. Or because you moved out of Sheldon's seat, or because you took the call in the other room. I mean, he gave a half a dozen examples in that little clip. But this is the best for everybody, because everybody's happy. It's fun for you. It's fun for your kids. It's really exciting. So, giving a kid something that they want when they finish their chores. perfect example of a positive reinforcer. So some of this you'll have like done, you can do this explicitly where you have like a, you have like a whiteboard, let's say, in your kitchen, where it'd say, if you do this, then you will get that. And so they know. And then you want to be super consistent. Or it can just be on the fly, catching them being good, seeing them doing something great, and just like giving them a, hey, fantastic job. That goes such a long way. It's unbelievable how far that can go. So we talked a little bit before about shaping behaviors. And so if we have a big behavior that we want to change, all or nothing is going to be so frustrating for everybody involved. And I used the example of, it's like the you're getting warmer game. Okay, that's a little closer to what I was looking for. That's a little closer. But like cleaning a room is a great example, because if your child hasn't been cleaning his or her, who's got messy kids who you want their room a lot cleaner? It's usually a pretty good example. I have stepsons in their 20s, and they've moved out and gone away to college, but when they lived with us, I was like, oh, God, what can I do? But, if you were to wait to reward them until that room was exactly the way you wanted it, you're going to be waiting a long time. Your child's going to get frustrated. Your child's going to be like, I don't know why I even bother, because, nothing's ever good enough for you. Anybody ever heard your kids say that to you? Nothing's ever good enough for you, right? If you can do this successively, so even if the room still looks like a giant tornado hit it, but you notice that they took their laundry basket out and put it in the laundry room for the first time in ever, you want to say, great job. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And then as they do more, they can get either better rewards, more often rewards. You kind of have to work out what works for you guys. So, and then you can have something toward the end that's more like a big, so when you get the room completely, spotlessly clean, I've got, I don't know what you want, a $50 gift card to wherever it is their favorite place is waiting for you. But we want to do that slowly so they start getting some successes along the way. And then you have to be super consistent. You can't say oops, that's not perfectly spotless. You're not getting a gift card. You want to be fair about it. Yeah.
What do you do when there's no intrinsic motivation, like if the child is only motivated by rewards? It's just almost an obsession. Okay, if I do this, I get more, I get time. That's the only thing that they want to do, and there's never that intrinsic.
So that's a really good question. So I don't know if everybody can hear, but it was a really great question about if kids are not motivated by intrinsic rewards. Rewards will work over time to shape that behavior to be a permanent behavior. So that's sort of the idea, is to get that behavior shaped. So how old of a child are we talking? 11. Oh yeah. That's like right around that age. It's like, I'm only doing it for this. Okay. That's okay. That's fine. The other thing that works then sometimes with those kids is taking some stuff away. So they lose things as well. So they gain things and they lose things. And that is your child losing things as well?
Yeah.
Okay. So almost always, oh my God. So I'm going to have to tell on my stepson here. So he, when it was time to go to college, he wasn't sure whether he wanted to go or not. He was sort of like, he's not a very motivated guy. I've got one who's like motivated by everything under the sun and the other one who's like hard to motivate. And he said, I don't want to take this semester of college. And my husband said, well, that's fine, but you have to get a job. I forgot what the second, no, he wouldn't give my husband his grade. So he was supposed to get a job for the summer because the semester had ended. And he was also supposed to turn in his grades to my husband. Now, we had just been dating. I've only been married 3 years. And so we had just started dating. And I go, can I give you a little hint on how to handle this? because it had been going on for like a couple weeks where he didn't turn in his grades and he wasn't doing anything to look for a job. I go, turn off his cell phone. Turn off his cell phone. He'll come flying to you going, Dad, my cell phone's not working. And say, well, you know, when you start applying for jobs and show me your grades, it'll be turned back on. 6 hours. He had a job in 6 hours. You find that motivator, because everybody's like, there's something. And I remember many years ago when I was still a school psych intern, there was a young man who was failing grades in what grade was he in? Like maybe middle school, I think, if I remember correctly. He was in middle school, he was failing grades, but he was crazy about hockey. He lived for hockey. So he was like skipping classes, skipping school, but then his parents would drive him to hockey practice. So I pulled his parents aside and I said, no school, no hockey. It's that simple. So we brought the kid in and I broke the news to him that this was going to be the new plan, and his shoulders dropped. He just said, hockey's got nothing to do with school. I said, well, it does now. So there, I mean, you really can't. And it doesn't mean, I mean, I know this kind of sounds barbaric in some ways, but it really shaping that behavior and getting those successes. So here's this young man who had better grades and they started dropping. Something needed to be done. He wasn't willing to do anything, so make it worth his effort. And so it is really okay for it to be for intrinsic reasons, because that behavior gets shaped over time and then it kind of takes over. I have actually seen really, really sloppy kids become neat freaks over a period of time, right? Aren't you hoping that happens? So here's where it gets tricky. So I'm going to go jump right to the example. So mom, this is a super simple example. Mom has established with the youngster that you cannot have your dessert unless you finish all of your food. But it's not working. And mom can't figure out why it's not working. She doesn't get it. I don't understand why this isn't working. Well, she comes to find out that when she leaves the room, Dad often goes, here, son, have a little bit of mine. Don't tell mom. Have a little bit of mine. So now we call this a partial reinforcement. Think of a slot machine. Do you know why people will sit at slot? Well, they don't do that anymore, right? They just hit buttons. You know why people will sit at a slot machine for hours and hours and hours and hours? Partial reinforcement. Because you get a payoff every now and then. And that just keeps you hooked into thinking that. Also think about, oh my gosh, teenage dating. And you have a teenage daughter, and she really has this huge crush on a guy, and she's really interested in him. But he texts her every now and then. Sometimes he answers her texts, sometimes he doesn't. Anybody been in that situation with their kids? Or you were when you were in high school? I guess it wasn't texting then, right? We weren't texting, it was calling. But I mean, what are some of the examples of how your children have reacted when they've got somebody who they are interested in treating them that way? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, well, and a lot of times that's what happens on the other end of it too, because if you're playing this partial reinforcement game with the person, they're getting reinforced by it too. Oh, I can keep them interested in me, and I'll just like throw them a little crumb every now and then. And at odd times, like you never know when it's coming or when it's not coming. It's not like, oh, well, you know, he texts me once a week. You know, it's that, you know, it's always like, maybe 3 days in a row and then not at all for a week, and then maybe a couple more texts, and then just, it's that slot machine effect. And so that's what we call extinction, by her saying, I'm cutting him off completely. That's extinction, and it works beautifully. So I need to speed up a little bit here because I need to get to extinction because that's really important for parents to know. So negative reinforcement is removing an unpleasant stimulus. So for example, let's say a child's been grounded. Now, I don't recommend this very often, but your child was grounded and did something like incredibly wonderful. Like help their younger sibling with their homework all night long before they did their own, and then stayed up later to do their own homework, and you're just like, wow, that is fantastic. That's behavior that I really want to see more of. And so say, you know what? I'm going to lift your grounding early because that was really fabulous, and I'm really happy to see you doing that. And so that would be, you're taking away an unpleasant stimulus to increase behavior. We see a couple of things, especially on the anxiety program with kids who are having a tough time staying in the classroom. Anybody have kids who have a tough time staying in the classroom? Yeah. They're probably using one of these two methods, escape conditioning. So that's where they might act up. We were talking about with this Sunday school, they might act up in the classroom in order to be sent out of the classroom. Say, come on, get out. So that would be escape conditioning because they get their way by acting up a certain way and they got out of it. Avoidance conditioning would be they're completely avoiding it altogether. So that's the kiddo who's going to stay home and not even go to school. So here's some examples. So one of my favorite examples of how we shape behavior in ways we don't want to is, let's say you're in the store with your youngster. We're talking about little smaller kids. And your child's pointing to the ice cream. Ice cream. You're like, no, we're not getting any ice cream today. And the kid starts whining louder and louder. Ice cream, ice cream. And you go, no, we're not getting ice cream. The child throws himself on the ground and starts stomping and kicking and screaming at the top of their lungs. Now, crowds forming, and you go, take the ice cream. Come on, let's go, right? Just reinforce the tantruming behavior, right? So because you're standing your ground, and then it got to be too much for you, and then you had to give in. Stop nagging at a child to help. So a child's, you're nagging at a child because they're upset, and you're like, come on, stop it. I want you to stop doing what you're doing and do your homework, but the child's escalating, and so you just stop it. So we have a tendency as human beings, because we want to remove the aversion from our own lives too, right? So don't we want to go like, oh, I've got a headache, you'll shut up if I'll just shut up, so let's just do that. So there's all kinds of scenarios for that. That last one is an example that we ran into when we first opened the adolescent anxiety program about 8 years ago. We had a youngster who, she was pretty petite, and she went to a pretty large high school. And she was becoming afraid of using the hallways during the bells because she was little and she was afraid she'd get crushed or hurt or stepped on, and I get that. But what happened is they're very, very well-intentioned school and very, very well-intentioned parents let her go between classrooms off the bell time, come into the school through the back, and she was also extra afraid to come down the stairs because she was afraid of being crushed walking down the stairs and falling, and so they put all of her classrooms on the first level. So here is a girl who is operating kind of at full force, and she started having some difficulty with anxieties, and so she was operating, but what were they now doing? They're collapsing her behavior even more, because to make her comfortable in the short run, they said, Well, and what's the underlying message to that? You can't do it. You can't do that. So we'll fix things for you so you can. And so what's college going to look like? What's she going to look like when she goes out into the workforce? So we did some shaping by successive approximations with her. We had her come into slightly larger settings in the classroom, and we would do exposure therapy with her in the clinic. And finally, as she was graduating from the program, it's like, I love these moments. Her therapist and I stood, her family was all on board with our being there, but her therapist stood at one end of the hallway, and I stood at the other end of the hallway as the bell rang, the final bell rang, where there's a huge crush, and she would walk straight down the middle of it from her to me, and it was such a beautiful thing to see her get her life back. So I imagine some of these things I'm talking about, it's like, gosh, that sounds so mean, but what really makes it so worth it is watching that child walk down that middle of that hall with hundreds of other kids and being able to do it. Yes?
Just with you talking about like the student getting all these changes put into place
Yeah.
to help them, but in the end it hurts them.
Yeah.
Situations where you work with the school and they try to put a 504 in place for your child to help them deal with their issues. Are they taking into consideration and working with you guys, or how do they know that what they're doing is in the end going to hurt them versus help them?
Yeah.
Because I'm dealing with a situation like that where they've put a lot of accommodations in place for my daughter.
Okay, well, let's talk afterward so we can talk specifically about your daughter without being recorded, but we love to work with the schools. Some schools are better at working with us than others. Some schools welcome us. They want us to come to the 504. They want us to, to the meeting, the IEP meeting, and they want us to do all kinds of things. But other schools are just like, no, we've got it. So it really depends on the school, but we always reach out and we always try to have those accommodations looked over by our team. Okay, punishment is not as effective as reinforcement, and it's no fun for anybody. Nobody really likes it to do any punishment. So, a positive punishment, again, is adding something to decrease behavior, student getting suspended, so the suspension is added after an inappropriate behavior. Negative punishment would be removing, taking a cell phone away for skipping school. So I'm removing your cell phone, and that's going to be aversive for you because you skipped school. And if they won't give it to you, turn it off. That's the best feature. You can just turn them off. Deek, deek, deek. No cell phone for you. There are some challenges with punishments, and that's what I've been talking about all along. Like sometimes we think that this is going to be a punishment, and it turns out not to be. I remember when my mom, maybe this is why I'm a behaviorist, when my mom would ground me, or it wasn't go to my room, it wasn't go to your room, she would say go to my room. Oh, there's no toys in there, there's nothing to do in mom's room, so I had to go to mom's room. If I was sent to a room, I wasn't sent to my room where there was all kinds of fun things to do in there. So, getting around that, and she probably figured that out over time. She's probably like, well, I'm hearing too much fun going on in there when I send her to her room. Let's make this a little bit more aversive for her. And so you have to think those things through with respect to your kids. Another thing with punishment is it doesn't really shape new behavior the way positive reinforcement does. It extinguishes a behavior, but it doesn't shape new behavior. Does that make sense to you? Okay. All right, so again, positive reinforcement, adding negative reinforcement, these are both to increase behavior. Positive punishment, negative punishment, decreases or increases behavior. Sorry. Added to decrease, taken away to decrease. Okay, now, this is really important. I know we're running short on time, but I really wanted to get to this. So extinction is the process of unlearning a learned response through new or no consequences. So that's a pretty heavy example, but one thing that we've noticed, if we have a youngster with us who's been self-injuring, if they get a lot of attention around that, what do you think might happen if it's attention-seeking behavior? So we want to carefully make sure they're staying safe. So we want to make sure that they're not hurting themselves in a fashion that's going to lead to, dramatic injury or permanent injury. So we might just say something like, I understand you self-injured yesterday. May I please see your arm? Okay. Now, please go to the nurse and have that dressed and return to group. It's not that we don't care. We don't want that behavior to keep repeating. And we know that if we're going, oh, honey, I'm sorry. What was wrong? Please, let's do a crisis intervention right now. Come to my office. We'll talk. We do that. I know it sounds like, make it sound like we just walk around with like bullwhips. And no, we do. We care deeply, deeply about the kids that we serve. But we do so in a way that's going to help them succeed and get rid of some of these behaviors that we don't want to see happen again. But it's very difficult and uncomfortable to withhold reinforcement. Like I was talking about, sitting on the bed and having a nice warm conversation with your child after they did something wrong. That's hard to, it's like, because you want to do it. And it's like, but I want them to stop doing this. And so I need to kind of go by the rules of operant conditioning. And so, yes, so we talked about this, about sticking with the plan, not doing the partial reinforcement, and how important that is. So here comes the extinction burst. What's an extinction burst? Withholding reinforcement from previously reinforced behavior. That's an extinction burst, and that's how you might get a response. So remember the kid that was tantruming for ice cream? Right, so in the middle of the floor, mom, just to save embarrassment and to move on and get going with the shopping, which, nobody can blame her for that. But mom hands her the ice cream. Kid's fine, I can get through my shopping. Whew. But if you go to a behavior therapist, they're going to say, well, this is what I want you to do. The next time your kid starts tantruming in the middle of Jewel, I want you to walk away. Now you're going to stay like over an aisle so you can maybe see your child and your child can't see you. And so what you'll see is, ah, and then all of a sudden, have you ever seen your kids do this? Ah! Ah! Nobody's watching anymore. What am I doing this for? So that's the function of the behavior. That function of that behavior has been that child has learned that if I am loud enough, that I get what I want. That's what the result's going to be. Here's what it looks like. So here is child's behavior, tantruming, tantruming, tantruming. Now all of a sudden I'm not going to do that reinforcement anymore. I went to a behavior analyst and they said, walk away from your child every time they do it, every single time, because you don't want that partial reinforcement when you walk away sometimes. But now here comes your next door neighbor and they're watching this and you're like, have some ice cream. Partial reinforcement. Woo. So extinction burst. What do you suppose this is? This is the tantruming behavior and what's going to happen to it. It gets worse. But then look what happens to it. Boom. It goes away. So if you are seeing a therapist and they don't warn you about this, you're going to come back to the therapist the next week and go, thanks, doc. My child's worse now. I really appreciate that. Oh, did I forget to tell you about the extinction burst? Yes, you didn't mention that whatsoever. Well, your child's behavior is going to get worse before it gets better. Why? Well, remember that girl in the beginning? That was shaped. And so that tantruming behavior was shaped because I have learned over time that I get what I want if I do this. Now, they don't sit there craftily. This is how learning works. That's how, I didn't sit there and think about how I learned how to say, hi, my name is Joann, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. That's just shaped over time. So that kids' tantruming behavior is simply shaped over time. So now they're tantruming, and this level of tantrum used to get me ice cream, and it's not getting me anything. Well, let's just crank that up, because if this level got me ice cream, and this level didn't get me ice cream, then this level got me ice cream, then this level got me ice cream, and now all of a sudden this level doesn't get me ice cream, hello, boom. But they have to learn over time that that's not going to get you ice cream any longer. It used to, but it's not anymore. And so that's super important to hang on to that message. Okay, so I just actually kind of went through all of this. I don't think I need to, because I am starting to run out of time. But yeah, we give in, and that'll just intensify the behavior. Okay, so back to these 3 rules for parents. Reward desired behavior often and quickly, and that is rule number 1. If you do that more often, you're going to start seeing some behavior changes. 2, don't accidentally reward problematic behavior. 3, correct unwanted behavior, but do so deliberately. So I'm going to go through. Great ways of rewarding good behavior: catch them being good. As soon as you see a behavior you would like to see more of, immediate reward. And it could be so easy. And I'll talk about the 3 types of rewards quickly. Social rewards are extremely effective. Hugs, smiles, winks, an attaboy, words of praise, clapping, like yay, pat on the head. Anything that lets them know that you're really pleased with what they just did is going to serve to increase that behavior. Activity rewards. Whatever your kid likes to do and they would like to do more of. Some kids like to help with cooking, earning Netflix time, going out for pizza with a family. Some of it is more immediate than others. So you want some of those that can be super immediate, and some of them are, because you just behaved in amazing ways, this weekend we're going to go out for pizza with the family. But make no mistake about it, that's because you're being a rock star. Just kind of remind them, give them the verbal, social reward immediately, and then they can have an activity award later. Material rewards. I had to ask my students that have young kids what some material rewards are, because you can see they don't have to be terribly expensive. And what sometimes I will suggest parents do is even have a basket of these less expensive rewards that your child picked out previously. So like have them pick out their favorite fidget spinners, or have them pick out, I don't know what Shopkins are, but you probably do. Okay, have them pick out some Shopkins, and you have this in a basket, and so you can say, oh my gosh, that was fantastic, pick one of your rewards. Yeah?
Okay, so for that perfectionist behavior, do we not want to reward the actual perfection, but instead reward the small accomplishments
Yes.
along the way?
Yes.
That's kind of what I'm hearing. Like,
Yes.
So that
Yeah.
way we're not reinforcing that anxiety.
That things have to be absolutely perfect.
So we want to
And I think receiving those small rewards along the way will really help with that, because it won't, yeah, you're welcome, absolutely. Don't accidentally reward problematic behavior. I think I peppered this through quite a bit, so you've got a pretty good grasp on this. Whenever misbehavior is rewarded, it's strengthened. So it happens a lot on 1 or 2 occasions that I call them. Controlling by pain. So I have been screaming loud enough and long enough and being annoying enough that you're going to give in. So they're controlling you through pain. And then I call the other one controlling through torture, where they're actually threatening to hurt themselves or kill themselves or do something really catastrophic. And I've seen a lot of parents really bound by kids who have learned to use that to control their behavior. And it's really, really heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for everybody involved. And so that's why we like to employ things that can reduce that. And parents and children teach each other behaviors. I think we've gone over this plenty. I think you guys have a really good grasp on that. So finally, correct unwanted behavior, but do so deliberately. I always say if you're going to employ a punishment, you want to do so thoughtfully and not in a knee-jerk fashion. So I've been telling on my own family so much. So here we are back with my husband now. My stepsons live in Portland, Oregon, going to college. And my stepson didn't, he had a car window broken and he didn't get it fixed for like 2 weeks, right? My husband owns a car. He's like, oh my God, it's getting rained on in there. People can break into it. It's not secure. Says, son, please, you've got to get that fixed. You got to get it fixed. So he just decided that he's going to employ that turning the phone off thing again. I'm going to turn his phone off. Well, he didn't give him any lead up to that. He didn't let him know. It was a knee-jerk reaction. And here, he he doesn't have a home phone, so how's his son going to get his phone fixed when his phone's been, get his car fixed when his phone's been turned off? So it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. It would have been better if it was planned and said, I'm going to give you 2 days to make the appointment to get the car fixed, otherwise your phone's being turned off. So it's better if they know what's coming, especially if it's a behavior that's been going on a long time for that. There are certain behaviors that you do need to have sort of a knee-jerk reaction. Think about somebody, kid running into the middle of the street. You have to have a knee-jerk reaction. You have to stop them immediately from doing something. And so it's in those particular times that, okay, we're talking about a dangerous situation here. So correcting behavior, scolding, natural consequences, which are, something's just going to organically happen. It would have been, so a natural consequence of my stepson not getting his car window fixed would have been his car got stolen. He came out, oh my gosh, my car's stolen. That would have been a natural consequence. Well, you made it pretty easy for somebody to steal your car by not having a window in it. Logical consequences are consequences like I was just talking about, like I'm asking you to do something, you're not doing it, I'm going to take something important away from you. So that would be a logical consequence. Time out for younger kids, and any kind of behavioral penalty, like you don't get to have TV time or Netflix time tonight. Questions? I saw